All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here today and online. My name is Keith Grindstaff. I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Officer for the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. And we're going to call the meeting to order, so we'll go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping here. I need you guys to all see where all the exits are. There's tons of exits to get out of here. So kind of like an airline person, go to the exits. The restrooms are down this hallway here. Just keep going straight all the way down the hall until you get to the drinking fountains and take a slight right. So that's all I've got for now. Patricio, it's all yours.
Thank you, Keith. Welcome, everybody, to the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. Today is Tuesday, January 28th, 2025. We are meeting in Poaque, New Mexico, here at 10A Cities of Gold Road, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Just do want to start off by wishing everybody a Happy New Year, everybody around the room, board members and members online, and members of the public. And also, my name is Patricio Pacheco. I am your chair, and did want to start off with some introductions here, starting off with our advisory boards members, starting off with my right here with Joseph as an introduction.
Joseph Villegas, Texas Band of Yaqui Indians, Santa Fe County resident. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
On to Manny.
Manny Lesperance, I'm Vice Chair and retired Lanel Santa Fe County resident.
Steve McLaughlin, retired attorney and economist from Santa Fe County.
We do have 4 members online as well. Members online, would you guys please introduce yourself? I'll start off with Beverly.
Hi, I'm Beverly Martin. I live in Santa Fe County. I'm a member of the board, and I'm retired from Lanel.
Mark.
Hi, Mark Hayden, Santa Fe resident, General Counsel for the State of New Mexico.
Eleanor.
Good afternoon. Eleanor Bravo, Sandoval County, retired Southwest Director of Food and Water Watch.
Christy.
Good afternoon. Christy Green, Albuquerque, NMSU, and New Mexico Edge.
And Abby.
Good afternoon, Abby Hayward, Los Alamos County employee and Los Alamos County resident.
Thank you, members. We also have a caller on the phone. Members on the phone, would you guys like to identify yourselves? Or members from the public?
Is it my turn? Can you? Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, this is Arlena, Bernalillo County.
Thank you. Any other members online? No? Okay. Hearing and seeing none. Any members from our representatives online that would like to introduce themselves? Any members from the media that would like to introduce themselves? Hearing and seeing none, would we like to introduce our guests here? I'll go ahead and start off with Brad here at the right of the table.
Good afternoon. Happy New Year. I'm Brad Smith, President and General Manager of N3B.
Jessica?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My name is Jessica Kunkel. I'm the manager of the Department of Energy Environmental Management, Los Alamos Field Office, EMLA.
Thank you, guys. Thank you guys for being here today. Moving on, we're going to move on to other items. Any other items? I'm sorry. I would like to introduce our presenters, our speakers today. We actually have a guest speaker here, Dr. Inés Triay, Technical Review Team. And thank you for being here today. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I am Inés Triay, and I'm the lead of the independent review team on the Chromium migration.
Thank you for being here.
And this is my colleague.
Hello.
Dr. Daniel Stevens?
Yes.
That's what I wanted. Let me get a cooler loud.
I'm sorry, guys. Can you guys please mute yourselves? Thank you.
So I'm Dan Stevens. I'm a member of the independent review team. I live in Albuquerque.
Thank you, Doctor. Moving on to other items. And next is the new business. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm moving ahead of myself here. So I'd like to make the approval of the agenda. So I did want to mention there is a change on the agenda. We do have our Hazardous Waste Bureau Chief, J.V. Don Nance, online, and he is going to be making his update after the update from EMLA Los Alamos. So that'll be after 2:35. So again, we'll have a change on the agenda. But again, we'll go through the agenda. We're going through old business now with update from chair and vice chair. We'll have update from subcommittee chairs. We'll move on to other items, then move on to new business along with other items. At 1:35, we'll have an update, from the look ahead from M3B, since we do have a change in the agenda. And then we'll move on to update from EM Los Alamos Field Office. Then last, we'll have the update from NMED. Then we'll move on to a break at 3:05. At 3:15, we'll have our guest speaker giving us an update on Hexavalent Chromium technical review findings. Then we'll have our public comment and an update from DDFO, and then we'll adjourn. Can I have a motion on the agenda?
Move to approve.
Stephen approved.
I'll second.
Manny second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you, members. Looks like we got an approval on an agenda. On to old business. So we got an update from chair and vice chair. Manny, do you have anything for us?
No, I don't have any update. Looking forward to the new year, and especially looking forward to the presentation today.
Thank you, Manny. I did just want to mention on the update from chair and vice chair, we did have some milestones, calendar year 24 milestones sent out to us. So I'd advise you guys to take a look at those milestones, because there are goals that were completed for FY24. And we do have some FY25 goals coming our way. Again, and that is a scorecard for the milestones that were completed for the cleanup up on the hill. That's all I had for update. Any updates from subcommittee chairs? I'll start off with Mark online. Mark, do we have any updates from our consent order subcommittee? Hearing none. Okay, no problem. We can hold off on that. I'll move on. I'll move on to Beverly. I'm sorry, doesn't sound like our members online have any audio. I'm going to move on to our members here in the room, which should be Joseph, member of ours. Oh, I'm sorry, before we move on to Joseph, we did have a member just walk in the room, Danielle. We just finished introductions. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Danielle Duran. I work for Los Alamos County, and I live in Espanola, New Mexico, and I'm a former city councilor for that city, and I'm really honored to be part of the CAB.
Thank you, Danielle. So we're going to move on to an update from Joseph on our public subcommittee.
Mr. Chair, at this present moment, we do not have no updates. We're still working on having our next meeting this coming up in February. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Joseph. Members online, subcommittee chairs, vice chairs, Beverly and Mark, would you like to mention anything or any updates on our subcommittees? Well, we are having an audio problem online, so we may just wait 1 minute, see if we can get that issue fixed, and maybe we can get an update from Mark and Beverly.
Have some coffee. There's coffee and tea.
There is for members in the room. There is some coffee and tea over to the right. Also some delicious pastries. If you could, welcome to have some while we try to work through these audio issues. Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
We should be back up and cooking with that. Let him know, Patricio.
Sounds like we're back on now. I apologize for that and for anything that you guys may have missed. But we were having updates from our subcommittee chairs and just had a introduction from our member Danielle. And we're going to have an update from Beverly from our chair on our subcommittee.
Hi, the Risk Committee hasn't met since before Christmas. We want to welcome Inés back to New Mexico. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. And we're really looking forward to the results of the committee the team that was put together to look at the chromium plume. Thank you.
Thank you, Beverly. Mark?
Actually, I think we're going to have the vice present because I'm not an official member.
I believe you can still present, Mark. That's okay on Bridget's end.
Abby, you prefer me to go?
Or unless Abby, unless you'd like to go,
No.
either or.
The thumbs up meant no, that I'll do it. We actually haven't met. We had a planned meeting, and then there was a cancellation, and then there was an attempt to reschedule. We did not get that done. We do have a number of questions for N3B to respond to that went out to Bridget a while back, and I don't know what the status of that is. And we're all anxious to see how the revised consent order rolls out with the dates and answers to those questions that I presented. So if there is an update, we're looking forward to hearing about it. And if not, that's all we have to report. Abby, did I miss anything?
No, I think though we asked because I know there was this clarification, I think the questions were requested of EMLA and not N3B.
I think both is what I was hoping to get. So yes.
Okay.
Answers were sent from our questions from the consent order. Bridget did send those out to the group. It is an email from Inés regarding those questions being answered. So if we have any feedback, we are welcome to email those to Inés or Bridget. I don't know if any member has had time to review those, but those are available online for those questions. But yeah, thank you, Mark.
Mr. Chair?
Stephen, go ahead.
Do we have any updated timeline on the receipt of the work plans?
I have not seen any, no.
Keith, do you have any information on that?
Not right now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Danielle?
I have a quick question for Keith. I think we've heard that there's a pause on a lot of external communications for all agencies across the administration. Is this affecting the work that we're doing with the CAB?
So I'll take that. So yeah, there are a number of executive orders and other policy decisions that are being directed through the federal agencies, and so we're trying to adapt and respond as quickly as we can. Public outreach is one thing that we are having to coordinate centrally through DOE headquarters, so we will continue to do that. We do have a request in that we're working with regard to our Federal Register notices for upcoming meetings to make sure that we can continue to have our forward-looking meetings. I believe specifically the March meeting is the one that's in question. We're still okay for our February CAB meeting. And we'll keep you posted as things progress if there's any major update that might affect you, but otherwise we're continuing to manage it.
Mr. Chair?
Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Jessica. Go ahead, Stephen.
Danielle anticipated a question I was going to ask when we got to new business, but that was much the same thing. To the extent that there are executive orders which impact our activities, will we receive copies of those?
So the copies of the executive orders are available on the White House website, which I would recommend be the first source of that information, because information is sort of trickling down, perhaps not very consistently throughout all of the federal agencies. And so that would definitely be my first recommendation, and we can get the link out to that site if that would be helpful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, that would be great. Great. On to new business. Public outreach did give us update. Yes. Yep. Yeah. Thank you. So on to new business here. Stephen had a question Any other follow-up questions that we were just discussing? No? Hearing and seeing none, I did want to mention, again, we have those milestones coming out that we can look forward to. And also am looking forward to recommendations for the plume that are going to be presented here later this afternoon, which is something that's been ongoing and in mitigation here for quite some time now in the past year. And we do know that that cleanup was making good progress, and there's a stop to it. And so it'd just be interesting to find out what kind of conclusions we've come up upon. I do not have any other items for new business. And any other items from the CAB? Members online, members in the room? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to move on to an update from Brad Smith, President and General Manager of N3B.
And good afternoon. So the last time I spoke directly to the CAB was last March. I had a bunch of stand-in folks that you got to meet my management team, and I'm going to continue to do that through the year, because I think that as you meet my team, you start to understand the diversity we have and the strength we have in the team. In the audience, I have Deb Kerrigan, my communications director. We have Kristen Henderson, David Abelson, and my ESH&Q PM, Robert Edwards, who will, at one point this year, have the fun of a speaking role. So one of the other things that began when I was presenting a year ago is continuing to develop our relationship with the MLA, and I'm happy to say that Jessica Kunkel and I and our teams are striving to really try and have positive working relationships, because as we go, the mission goes. And so ensuring that we're aligned, that what we present for our workforce is a similar message, and back to what we're seeing in the communications pathways and other things, people want to know what we're doing. We were given option period 2, which I'm excited to have. It's, from a workforce perspective, allowing me to continue to develop and maintain a trained and qualified workforce. 2025's scope is largely carrying on from where we were. However, we've completed the corrugated metal pipe campaign, so all 158 are done. In their standard waste boxes, there's 792 waiting to be characterized, and then we will start a very consistent production campaign of shipping down to WIP, and that's going to be a really good news story. We are focusing more on the environmental remediation side of things, so as we speak and hear about the independent technical review of the chromium plume, we have continued to run our interim measure. It's on 24/7 operations now. It has had just a phenomenal run time. We've had very little issues with it. So that's good news as we continue to understand what we need to do between what we're doing today and work on the recommendations of the independent technical review team. Excuse me. So aggregate areas are the real area in environmental remediation we're focusing on right now. To retain a trained and qualified workforce, one of the things we've talked about before is how do I cross-skill? So a lot of the operations staff that was operating out in CH True and TA54 we're actually placing over with Troy Thompson and his folks to learn not only what environmental remediation work is, but it gives them a better perspective of how they fit in the overall N3B aspect. They're used to characterizing waste, dispositioning waste, shipping waste, but this gets them actually into cleaning up the land, cleaning up the water, seeing what beauty there is, because almost, for those of you that have gone through the tours, they've predominantly been working in domes. This gives them the ability to get out into Starmer Upper Pajarito, into 2 Mile Canyon. And once they start getting out and seeing that, when they go back, when we begin our Pit 9 work here in a year and a half or so, that gives them an appreciation of the entire scope and what we are doing for our cleanup mission. So I mentioned the CMPs going to WIP. We anticipate planning to start those shipments in late 2025. WIP is in a maintenance outage. We are working closely with them. We got the high energy real-time radiography up and running. That was an excellent achievement. We were working with the WIP personnel and the central characterization program out of Carlsbad. And in early December, that came back up, and we are starting to feed waste in to the machines and getting them ready for when WIP goes, that our shipments can begin. I spoke a little bit about Pit 9, and that's really the next retrieval piece we have to do. But right now, we are in not only characterization, but we have to upgrade our documentation that will allow us to license the work. And that'll take us approximately a year and a half to enact that. Looking forward working with Jessica and her staff and DOE headquarters so that we get a fit-for-purpose safety basis, as it's called, and that will allow our operators to go and execute the work. And I will status that as we get into the year. Low-level, mixed low-level waste, that will continue on. When we started the contract, we had 451 legacy waste containers. We have 111 remaining, and we'll complete those this year. So that's another good news story. Consent order, we talked, there's 11 consent order milestones in fiscal year 25. As we work through Chickawi, Starmer aggregate areas, we want to complete that work by the end of this fiscal year. We are working in 2 Mile aggregate area, which is beginning our PCB sampling. And material disposal area T, as in Tango, we're completing the risk assessment this year. Soil vapor extractions continuing at MDA C and L. And it's nice when, again, our workforce gets to continue working and gets into a rhythm where we can expand the training qualification of those actually doing the work. So we have more than one person or one crew doing it. N3B has already met 1 consent order milestone for 25. It was due during the first quarter, and it's the RDX plume characterization that it's just summarizing some work that was due. Mission excellence, the other thing we started talking about a year ago is what are we doing for our workforce for retention? And we want to make sure that when we have a positive work environment and one that we are talking about 1 N3B, but just because you're sitting in environmental remediation or CH True doesn't mean that if you're in the bank building, how do I fit? Because if I'm doing payroll or I'm doing engineering, I don't necessarily go out and see what's happening. So we've started tours for everybody, including our admins, so that they can get out and see what's happening, be part of it. We also want them to go out and get to know the people because, again, if I'm having an issue with a paycheck, there's nothing like being able to pick up a phone and know somebody's sitting there and is understanding that I'm out doing the work and I can't necessarily come back into a bank building to have something happen. So we're trying to become more of a service-oriented organization. We're also upgrading our maintenance and work control programs this year. You hear the term safety management programs. Those are the things that keep not only our workers safe, but also ensure that if we do the work right, it protects the environment and it protects the public because you don't have releases, you don't have events, and that at the end of the day is what we want to do. We completed the end of fiscal year. In fact, right now, we are still below DOE goals for safety metrics. So this is the first time, I think, Robert, since it was May 2021. And so we take great pride in the fact that we're getting things done, we're getting it done safely. Questioning attitude and stop work authority, we've been talking a little bit about that. See something, say something. And we are celebrating anybody that does that because every time they stop and take a pause, we can go back, change the paper that might not be right, get them back working because they've had a question answered. And those that have worked at Landell or at any other facility know that it's easy to get that production mentality and you don't stop. If you can get the safe production where people are actually considering how they're executing at the beginning of the day and they close out the end of the day and they know that they did what they were setting out to accomplish, that is a good thing. So kudos to the workforce because without them doing what they're doing, I wouldn't be able to sit here and talk about the good things that are happening at N3B. The other thing that is coming back, we just completed our next safety we'll call it Safety Conscious Work Environment Survey. And we improved for the most part, but there are still two areas that are lacking. One is, if you have a question, are you really getting the answer that you want? And that's management time. So people like me being in the field, they like when we come out. And the last few months, I haven't been out as much as I should, I admit it. But that is one of the tempos for the new calendar year that me and my staff are looking at being out. And we go out with, Jessica and I actually tour together because there is a nice synergy that we want people to see that we're working together. We're not working cross purposes. And I think finally, the last thing is that I'd really like to stress is the fact that this mission protects everybody that's sitting here. Our cleanup, and the more reliable that we do it, we live here in northern New Mexico. And we want people to feel that the work we're doing is worthwhile and it's being done safely. So when the CAB or other members of the public go and see what we're doing, I think, and I hope that you feel like you get some solace in the fact that we care about what we're doing. People are putting their hearts and souls in what they're doing, and they love talking about what they're doing. So if you see any of my staff sitting in Smith's or wherever else, stop them and ask them what they're doing and say, Brad told you to do it, and it'll be all right. And without any other questions, I'll wrap that up because I know I am not the featured speaker today.
Thank you very much, Brad, for that update. We're going to move on to some questions from the members. Joseph?
It's not much of a question, Mr. Chairman, but I will...
Comments?
It's not much of a question, but it's just a comment for Brad. And it's a real simple comment. You know, I appreciate, what did I write here? I appreciate that your positive presentation is straightforward and it speaks in volumes.
If you click on that one, there you go. Now you should be able to.
Anybody online, can you guys please mute yourselves?
I've got expanded, so the middle top one is the one that got expanded everywhere. Wait, your microphone's on.
Thank you.
As I was saying, thank you. I appreciate, Brad, your positive presentation is straightforward and it speaks in volumes, especially establishing a trustful relationship with our communities across the board. And just your words. And your words are, you can back it up. You can say, you know what, I can back it up, and then guess what? I support that, so I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for that comment, Joseph. Any other members online have any comments and questions? Hearing and seeing none. I did want to thank you, Brad, for that update. And I did just have a comment. I also appreciate everything that you guys are doing up there, along with all the education and training that you're doing to our students here and giving them an opportunity to do work and something they feel good for themselves and for the community. Yeah, thank you, Brad. Next, we're going to move on to an update here from Jessica Klunkel, EMLA Field Office Manager. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Patricio. And good afternoon to the members of the board, as well as those attendees both here in person and online. I'm really excited to be back here to provide you with some updates from EMLA from the last time I had an opportunity to meet with the board. With today's focus on the Hexavalent Chromium Expert Technical Review Report, I'm going to keep my remarks short, and it's also nice that Brad was able to report on the most meaningful things that we're working on up at the Hill. I did want to just take a quick moment and really provide kudos to the entire team, the combined EMLA and 3B team, as well as our extended team that we work with on the corrugated metal pipe project. The one thing that Brad didn't mention, which I think is really worth mentioning, is that that project is really a proving ground for the more challenging retrievals of buried true waste that we will have to be navigating in the future. And I'd also like to point out that Brad and his team were incredibly successful at actually deploying innovative techniques to provide real improvements with both production efficiency or operational efficiency, if you will, as well as safety. And I think that type of innovation is incredibly important as we move forward, as we start to tackle the most challenging scope that we have with legacy cleanup in Los Alamos. So just wanted to really foot stomp that. And then also say that we really are now turning our attention to the next phase, which is initiating shipments of the CMP waste to WIP. And I'm just going to turn to a couple updates from my discussion of priorities at the last CAB meeting. In November, I shared with you that one of my top priorities as the manager for EMLA was to foster robust collaborative relationships to fortify both our mission success as well as our organizational success. And so to that end, as Brad mentioned, one of the most critical things that I've been doing is actually taking site tours to really get out and meet with all of the employees and have a chance to really demonstrate the partnership that I'm working to build with Brad and his immediate team, but also just show the support for the workers in the field, because without them, legacy cleanup in Los Alamos just would not be possible. I've also been working very diligently to continue the ongoing engagement with Pueblos, stakeholders, and our regulators, and will continue to prioritize these engagements as well as look for opportunities to expand them. In November, we provided a very robust update on the revised 2016 compliance order on consent or consent order. And I'm happy to share that together EMLA and N3B are now working to initiate the planning that's required to comply with the new requirements of the revised consent order. So particularly, we're looking forward to establishing the 5-year schedules that are required for Class A campaigns, which is something that we'll be working to solidify with the New Mexico Environment Department over the coming 6 or 7 months. With regard to the strategic vision, we continue to make significant progress towards finalizing that document and rolling out the framework to the CAB as well as members of the public. We are anticipating that we'll be finalizing that document in the coming months and working to complete rollout about the summer timeframe, and that will include public engagements as well as obviously interactions with this group here. And we're really looking forward to that. And as I mentioned, I was going to keep my remarks short because I am not the primetime speaker here today with the expert technical review committee members that we have. And so I'm just going to keep my remarks short, but welcome any questions.
Thank you for that update, Jessica. Any members have any comments or questions for Jessica? Seeing none here in person, any members online? Any comments or questions for Jessica? Hearing and seeing none, thank you again, Jessica, for that update. Next item on the agenda, looks like we are moving quite along and are moving a little ahead of schedule. But next we do have an update from EM Los Alamos. I'm sorry, we did have a change in the schedule here. So back up to the top, update from NMED, John David Nance, Hazardous Waste Bureau Chief. John, are you online by chance?
Yes, I am.
Great, thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and everyone that is in attendance and online. Just quick to give an update, LANL topics, and then I have some WIP updates as well. Once again, ITR will be coming in after the break, and they're the main topic for this one, so I'll try and get through this really quickly. So just as you know, NNMCAB and DOE signed a settlement agreement on August 30th, 2024, which is the modifications to the 2016 consent order. In there, the consent order does require an expanded 5-year schedule campaign, and includes a campaign completion dates to facilitate transparency with NMED and the public regarding a realistic timeline for cleanup work. DOE hasn't officially begun those discussions toward that requirement. However, DOE and NMED are in communications, and we are working to set meeting dates to start working through the negotiations for Appendix A, B, and C. So that is in the works. We are in communications with DOE, and they are actively communicating to set those meetings up. DOE does have until July 31 of 2025 to submit a proposed revision, and the parties have until September 30th to reach alignment and finalize those appendices. Like I said, those discussions haven't officially started yet, but we are in communications with DOE. We're actively looking to get that process started sooner than later. Moving on to groundwater. Simmer 3 is the next proposed groundwater monitoring well that's set for prioritization for completion. The goal of that well is to evaluate the potential contamination on the Pueblo de San Ildefonso lands that is south of the injection well locations. Those conversations are continuing with DOE and the Pueblo, looking to reach an agreement that will allow for the installation of that well. NMED does support the Pueblo's requirements for the design of that monitoring well on Pueblo lands. We also encourage accelerated action by DOE just to characterize the areas of uncertainty within the plume, within the chromium plume itself, including need to further evaluate the southern end by installing Simmer 3. As you know, NMED and DOE participated in an independent technical review for the Hexavalent Chromium project that began in early 2024. The ITR did complete their report. They have provided recommendations on a path forward for the chromium interim measures. Dr. Triay will be giving details of that ITR report following the break. With that, NMED does encourage transparent communication with DOE regarding the inclusion of the report's recommendations, and we will continue to necessitate compliance with regulatory direction. Final report of the ITR is available on the Hazardous Waste Bureau's website. Also, we've mentioned before, but just restating, DOE did act to resume the partial IM operations. They did restart injection into wells CRIN 3, 4, and 5, beginning in September 30th. And current extraction is coming from CREX 2 and 5. And so we're continuing to monitor those concentrations around the plume during this temporary authorization period. And we'll use that analytical data to consider adjustments for any expansion that might be needed. But that system is up and going and is continually to be monitored and is our best interim measures for keeping any chromium from migrating to the south. Moving on to corrective action documents. NMED issued a statement of basis for MDAC, and we received 3 requests for public hearing during the public comment period. Those requests came from Triad National Security, EMLA in the N3B, and from Nuclear Watch New Mexico. On January 15th, NMED held an informal conference with those hearing requesters to discuss scheduling of a public hearing. During that, discussions were had to look at potential for compromise, but none were reached. Parties are preparing to move towards a public hearing, which is tentatively expected to occur in early fall of 2025. Moving on to the 2 Mile Canyon aggregate area, the phase 2 investigation report. NMED is issuing disapproval with comments on that report. and also will be issuing an approval on the investigation report for MDA-A, Material Disposal Area A. In that approval, we did recommend proceeding with corrective measures evaluation for MDA-A. Those letters, they are signed. I just have to get them sent out, so they'll be being sent out either today or tomorrow. Landfill permitted related activities. March 20th, 24, EPA proposed amendments to the regulations for open burn, open detonation of waste explosives. DOE has been reevaluating the permit application with consideration to those proposed rule, and NOD is continuing to wait for that revised application. Communications with DOE is that they are close to resubmitting. I think it's in this signature process right now. Moving on to WIP. And looking at the new permit conditions implementation, a legacy true waste disposal plan was submitted to NMED in November 4th, and it's currently in a 60-day comment period. I believe that comment period is ending February 2nd, I believe. Don't quote me on that date. Also, WIP community forums. Permittees had their third and final 2024 community forum in Las Vegas, New Mexico. That was held on October 24th, 2024. On graded approach to audits, the proposed FY25 audit schedule and small generator storage site risk assessment was received October 8th of 2024. That audit schedule is currently in review by NMED. We also received the repository siting annual report, and that report was due by the end of calendar year 2024. That currently is with us in review. Moving on to WIP shipments update. This is from January 1st through November 5th of 2024. Cumulative, there's been 406 total shipments to WIP. A breakdown of that by generator site. Majority of those, 295, have been from INL, which Idaho National Laboratory. 39 shipments from Los Alamos National Laboratory. 57 shipments from Savannah River site. And 10 shipments from the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, 4 from Oregon National Laboratory, and 1 shipment from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. And those comprised 406 cumulative shipments, like I said, from January 1st, 2024 through November 5th of 2024. With that concludes my update. Yeah, we're very pleased to have the ITR available to present on their findings.
Thank you very much, John. That was really helpful. I'm going to move on to any comments or questions. We're going to start off here in person. Danielle, go ahead.
Hi, Mr. Nance. Thank you for that report. I'll just admit, I missed the part where I left off for MDAC. You had an informal hearing with those who had requested a town hall on the 15th of January, and then I missed when the town hall is going to be scheduled. It is not going to be scheduled?
Oh, no. It's, yes, we're preparing to move to a public hearing. It is tentatively, we're tentatively looking at fall of 2025 for that public hearing.
Okay, that's what I thought I heard, but I just wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Danielle. We also have a new member that joined us online during the presentation. Sterling joined us. Sterling, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Hi, I'm Sterling Grogan. I'm an ecologist living in Santa Fe, and I'm very pleased to be a part of the CAB. Thanks, Patricio.
Thanks for joining us today, Sterling. We'll move on to next questions. Mark?
Thank you, Chairman. This question is for David Nance, and it has to do with something I may have missed, but I understand there was a discussion, but no compromise was reached. Could you just remind me what that involved and where you're at?
Yes. For MDAC, the DOE parties have a position for the statement of basis that NMED proposed did not adequately look at all of the variables, specifically the cost analysis in providing the NMED statement of basis, and was looking at other remedial alternatives for implementation, specifically a evapotransport of engineered cap. NMED's stance and Nuclear Watch New Mexico's stance was for full excavation of MDAC. And during those discussions, there was discussions trying to find some type of a compromise or some type of agreement on a path forward. But due to the nature of both parties' stances, there wasn't really much of a middle ground on that.
Remind me, David, is the next step, if there's an impasse, to go to a mediation?
This one is moving towards a 2 hearing, and that would be the next step in this process, since the statement of basis was submitted, was publicly commented with request for hearing, and then with that, if there was no negotiations in the interim, then it'll move towards hearing.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions for Mr. Nance? Danielle, do you have another one for us? Oh, I'm sorry. I saw your name up. No worries. Hearing and seeing none, I did want to thank all 3 of our organizations here, N3B, EMLA, and New Mexico NMED, for the updates. And also, I do like what I heard on each of those updates is the communication to the public and okay, I'm sorry. Also, the engagement with the community is what I heard in those 3 introductions, and that's what we're striving for here at the CAB, is engagement with the community and let them know what's going on during our cleanup process, and give them the process to engage. So we also have another question online. Looks like it's for Ricardo. Looks like there may be a question for David Nance.
Hello, Mr. Chair and everybody online. Not a question, just a clarification I wanted to provide. Just on the WIP shipments that I have. So we have WIP shipments January 1st through December 31st, so all of last calendar year, because WIP is currently on a maintenance outage to catch up on their maintenance activities. So there are currently no shipments being taken to WIP, and they anticipate being done with their outage in mid-March. But in the meantime, all of calendar year last year, they had 470 shipments, 341 from Idaho, 64 from Savannah Riverside, 48 from Los Alamos, 12 from Oak Ridge National Labs in Tennessee, 4 from Argonne National Labs near Chicago, and 1 from Lawrence Livermore in California. So I just wanted to provide that clarification for the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. And is that based on the same time frame or same period there, January through November?
This was January 1st through December 31st.
Great. Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing and seeing none, we're going to move on to a break. Since we are moving a little ahead of schedule, we are going to break for 20 minutes. And we'll reconvene here in 20 minutes. So I got 1:56 here, so we'll be back at 2:26. Thank you, guys. Or 2:20. Welcome back, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to go ahead and get started with a presentation today from our guest speakers on hexavalent chromium technical review findings from our technical review team lead, Dr. Triay. Did I pronounce that correct? And Dr. Stevens, welcome and thank you. And also, just before we get started on the presentation, I did want to just ask our members to please hold their questions till the end of the presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to be giving some introductory remarks before we turn it over to the expert technical review team. So again, my name is Jessica Kunkel. I'm the manager of the EMLA office in Los Alamos. So next slide, please. So before we have the technical review experts really pull together and share with you the findings and recommendations from the analysis that they've done, I wanted to start with sort of a brief introduction to make sure that everybody is oriented to the hexavalent chromium
they're talking about the chromium plume.
We've got a hot mic, if we can go on mute if you're not talking. As a refresher, from about the mid-1950s to the early 1970s, potassium dichromate, which has an active ingredient of hexavalent chromium, was commonly used in power reactors around the world as a corrosion inhibitor, including use at Los Alamos National Laboratory. The hexavalent chromium plume that is currently within the Los Alamos National Laboratory boundary was first discovered in 2004. That was the first detection of any hexavalent chromium within groundwater that was above the New Mexico state standard of 50 micrograms per liter. And that was found completely by chance. There was other groundwater monitoring that was being done, I think just in an effort to collect some general data of the groundwater in the aquifer beneath the laboratory, and that's when it was discovered. Currently, the hexavalent chromium plume is estimated to be about 1,000 feet beneath both Morton Data and Sandia Canyons, which are both within the Los Alamos National Laboratory boundary, and then approximately 1 mile long and 1/2 mile wide. Next slide, please. So now I want to shift gears and talk about the interim measures that the Department of Energy has worked hand in hand with the New Mexico Environment Department to implement as we continue our investigation, including extent of condition as we work towards final remedy. So the interim measures, or as what we refer to as IM, their primary objective is to really address and prevent the migration of potential the potential migration of the plume beyond the Los Alamos National Laboratory boundary. So the Department of Energy worked hand in hand with the New Mexico Environment Department, including having NMED approve a work plan in 2015, and full operation of the interim measure actually commenced in 2018. The interim measure consists of 5 extraction wells, which actually extract water from the aquifer. That extracted water is then pumped over to a groundwater treatment system to actually remove the hexavalent chromium. And then that treated water is then pumped to 5 injection wells, or was was pumped to 5 injection wells that are along the down gradient plume edge, and that was meant to create sort of a hydraulic barrier to prevent migration of the plume. And connecting the series of wells and the groundwater treatment is we have over 3 miles of buried conveyance pipelines to actually transport the water between wells and the treatment system. Next slide. So with regard to interim measure operations, the interim measure was operating fairly normally, and then a new well named R45 was actually installed. And what we had actually started to see is that this specific well is called a dual screened well, where we have 2 different wells at 2 different depths within the aquifer. And the lower screen, or screen 2, had actually been noted to having increasing chromium concentration levels at a depth where chromium had not previously been seen. Based on this data, the New Mexico Environment Department was concerned that the use of the injection wells in the vicinity were actually potentially forcing the chromium contamination deeper into the regional aquifer. And so out of an abundance of caution, the New Mexico Environment Department directed that the Department of Energy actually cease injection by April 1st, 2023. So DOE actually did comply with that, but because of the nature of the interim measure being sort of a closed system and without a, I should say, a beneficial alternative water disposal method, we had to shut down full interim measure operations on March 30th, 2023. After we commenced and completed the shutdown of the interim measure, we began to see the chromium concentrations rebound very rapidly in all but 1 of our monitoring wells. Next slide, please. So in order to resolve some technical disputes that were lingering between the Department of Energy and the New Mexico Environment Department, as well as acting upon feedback that we received from the New Mexico Radioactive and Hazardous Materials Committee, the Department of Energy and the New Mexico Environment Department agreed to evaluate 5 specific topics, which are listed here on the screen. And I'm not going to go into any great detail here because I know the expert technical review team is going to cover these in detail, so I will withhold comments here. Next slide. So to address and really investigate these 5 technical topics, DOE and NNMCAB jointly convened a team of experts, which is pictured here on this slide, to review those 5 charge questions. And that technical team consists of experts from the Network of National Laboratories for Environmental Management and Stewardship, experts from industry, experts from academia, as well as experts from the USA EPA Region 6. So I'm not going to steal too much of the expert technical review team's thunder, but the primary recommendation coming out of the report is the immediate restart of the interim measure using just what we call portion of the original system while we do other studies and field investigations moving forward. And as you have heard, the New Mexico Environment Department and the Department of Energy have successfully coordinated a partial restart of the interim measure, which does align with this recommendation from the team. There are other findings and recommendations coming out of the report, and the Department of Energy and the New Mexico Environment Department will continue to work together to evaluate and prioritize those recommendations and determine how to best implement those recommendations going forward. And if we could go to the next slide. I think this has been talked about in fairly great detail, but I did just want to remind everybody we did resume partial operations of the interim measure on September 30th of last year. We're very excited to have that running. We think that restart of the interim measure is in the best interest of protecting the groundwater and preventing continued migration of the plume, particularly on the southern boundary of the Los Alamos National Laboratory. I believe when we had met in November, we had noted to you that the interim measure had been running at what we call a 24/5 operational schedule, so 24 hours a day during the work week. I believe in mid-November, we actually transitioned to 24/7 operations. And we're currently running, as you had heard from Mr. Nance, with 2 extraction wells and 3 injection wells. And we are continuing with our monthly sampling, but unfortunately at this point in time, it's just too early to tell what trends may be present based on the sampling data. So that is something that we will be continuing to monitor, and we will be reporting out as appropriate when we have additional information to share. And so with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Dr. Triay and her team.
So let me start, by acknowledging the team that was put together for this independent review. So I am the team lead. I am the interim dean of the College of Engineering and Computing at Florida International University. Dr. Vedat Batu is from Argonne National Laboratory. Dr. Frey Day Lewis is from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Dr. Insi Demirkanli is from Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Dr. Rick Devlin is from University of Kansas. Scott Ellinger is from EPA Region 6. Dr. Alexandra Hakala is from the National Energy Technology Laboratory. Dr. Brian Looney is from Savannah River National Laboratory. Dr. Charles Newell is from GSI Environmental Incorporated. Dr. Saurabh Pandey is from the same company, GSI Environmental. Dr. Mark Rigali is from Sandia National Laboratories. Dr. Daniel Stevens, who's here with me, is from New Mexico Tech and Steven and Associates. Dr. Matt Tonkin is from Papadopoulos and Associates. Dr. Haruko Wainwright is from MIT. David Wilson is from Longenecker and Associates. Many of them are online today, and you have this handout as part of the information that was provided to every one of you. So with that, we go to the next view graph. Next. Yes, please. So as Jessica has said, there are 5 topics in the charge questions of the DOE and the New Mexico Environment Department. Chromium plume control, chromium plume modeling, and then the proposal that NMED made to EMLA with respect to acceptable corrective actions and what is it that they wanted EMLA to do with respect to the interim measure. The 4th topic is regulatory matters, and the 5th topic is well design. So let me give you a flavor, and you have the memorandum in your packet that delineates the particulars of these charge questions. So many questions dealing with chromium plume control and the interim measure hydraulic control of the chromium. So essentially, we were asked whether the data and modeling results demonstrated hydraulic control of the plume during the operation of the interim measure as it was originally approved. We were also asked whether there was assurance that existing injection locations were outside the plume boundary. Part of this first topic was to what extent are the increasing chromium concentrations that were observed the result of an adverse impact of the current injection locations. And we were also asked to address whether the current interim measure is protective of the environment until, of course, a remedial alternative is selected. The last question within the first topic is if it isn't environmentally sound, what are the recommendations for maintaining hydraulic control? Going to topic 2, that's chromium plume modeling. Come back to second, not that one, yes, the one right after this one. Okay, so chromium plume modeling is, we were asked a number of things. First, we were asked whether the software that is currently used to model chromium migration indeed was appropriate. And then the second question and the rest of the questions in this particular topic dealt with data gaps, potential data gaps in the chromium plume modeling. So the third topic is now the one that I was telling you about that we're going to discuss together, number 1 and number 3, dealing with the proposal in Appendix A of a September the 6th, 2023 letter dealing with the operation of the interim measure. And in particular, we were asked whether the proposed Appendix A conditions were appropriate as part of the interim measure, whether there was a technical basis that had already been established to demonstrate that the existing extraction wells alone would control the plume, and whether the interim measure should be modified for use of an alternative injection location that did not provide hydraulic control. We were also asked whether the team's recommendation for considering alternative injection locations could be delineated. When we go to topic 4, that is regulatory matters. The first question dealt with the industry practices and EPA guidance for the maturity and understanding necessary for proposing remedial alternatives. The second dealt with the data needed and the uncertainties for designing a remedy. For instance, corrective measures implementation plan. The third question dealt with data gaps that needed to be closed. And the last question was whether the independent review team thought that an adaptive management strategy should be a component of the final remedy and utilization of that at Los Alamos. So in addition to that, we were asked about well design. When it comes to well design, we were asked, number 1, about the utilization of dual screen monitoring wells. And we also were asked about alternatives to bentonite and what were our opinions with respect to this type of work at Los Alamos National Laboratory. So with that, let's talk about the summary of findings and recommendations. Again, we're going to combine the chromium plume control and the questions dealing with the NMED memorandum of September the 6th, 2023, Appendix A proposal in that letter to EMLA. So the overarching, as the manager of EMLA has stated, the overarching recommendation of this independent review team was that we needed to restart as soon as possible the interim measure. And we did say that it could be in a limited or altered capacity, however, that it was imperative that the interim measure got restarted in order to control the migration of the chromium. Another one of the recommendations was the historical configuration and operation of the interim measure extraction and the injection wells that are resulting in incomplete hydraulic containment of the chromium plume. The interim measure needs to be operated in a revised configuration while further analysis improve the remedy. We also said that greater effort was needed to obtain consensus on the characterization, modeling, and remediation of the chromium contamination, and to transition from a limited startup of the interim measure to expanded operations. Alternative configurations needed to be considered. So now we're going to go to some of the figures in the actual report. And by the way, what we have presented here is verbatim from the findings and recommendations in the report, that has been published, and obviously you have access to. So Dr. Dan Stevens is going to take you through the summary of findings and how this led to these particular recommendations. Next view graph.
So this is a familiar looking plume map. I believe you've seen something like this many times. But as it relates to plume control or containment is the question at hand here. So we use this figure to say, as an example of, well, where is the chromium that we need to contain? What needs to be contained? What is the extent of it? Now, this is a figure from 2019. And what you can see in this figure, if you look at the bottom, there are 3 blue dots. Those are the injection wells along the San Ildefonso Pueblo boundary line, and there's 2 others just to the northeast of that. And in the interior of this plume are the extraction wells, the 5 extraction wells. So today, likely, I don't have any data from today, this day or last week. Most of our work probably was dated up through about August or so of last year, till we started in earnest writing the report. But what you can see here is that the southern boundary of this plume has shifted considerably to the north, away from the San Ildefonso boundary. You can also see that the plume is elongated to the east. And there's a well with a little red dot. You can probably barely make it out if you squint. It's called R70 on the very east side, inside of that boundary line. It's kind of shown in blue. That's R70. And this well indicates that the contamination likely has extended considerably farther than what was anticipated. And this was one of the triggers, if you will, for the action by NMED. So basically what we can say is that although we need to know the extent of contamination, we don't know it completely. There's some gaps, some data gaps in the extent of contamination. But from what we did have, we had to make some determination of whether the plume was contained or not. So we did that in 4 different ways. The first way, we looked at the second chart, the next chart, which you can flip over to the next graph, please. It's on page 5 of your handout. Now, I'm sure this will tax most people's vision here, but there are some things on here that you can probably readily see. Now, these are what we call time series charts. These show the concentration with time of chromium, and that's shown in green, and the concentration over time for sulfate is shown in red. And the time period extends from approximately 2009 to 2023. If you look closely at this behavior, we can start to understand how the system responded to IM operations. The IM operations in this chart, if this could be blown up or magnified as we have in these charts originally, there are vertical lines on these charts that show certain changes in IM operations. So the full IM operations are shown with one of these lines in about 2018. And what you can see in the right-hand side, the right third of these charts, for most of the charts, is that the green line shows a declining concentration. And this is where we, in part, interpret that the IM has been successful in lowering concentrations. Now, we don't just use the concentrations alone. We had to also look at the hydraulic head gradient. The hydraulic head gradient is the driving force on the contamination that helps tell us whether, if the concentration is going down, is the groundwater moving towards an extraction well? There might be some other explanation, for example. So we look very carefully at all this data. It's very tedious. But what we found is, for the most part, the IM seems to be successful. There's a couple of exceptions, and those exceptions were identified by the regulators, particularly at R61 S1 and R45 S2. S1 and S2 designate that there are different horizons within the same well from which samples are taken. A shallow would be S1, the deeper one in the same well would come from designated S2. Also of interest in this chart is that when we do talk about S1 and S2, if you could find any two pairs on here, you'll see that they're different. So when we have a sample from, let's say, let's say R45 at the shallow sample, and another one at R45 in the deeper sample, they're different. They behave differently. The fact that at one location we have two samples is very helpful in understanding what's going on. And it tells us that the behavior of the plume responds to the IM differently in different locations. So with that, method one, I will call it, you could go to the next chart. And this has, I think on your one you can see, one on the screen that I can see, it doesn't really show this very well, but on the handout you have, there's sort of a pink horseshoe on its side. And this is our interpretation, with some of the uncertainty, of our interpretation of what those time series charts tell us that the containment zone was found. In other words, inside of that pink zone, contamination in those wells was contained by the IM system. Outside of the pink zone, we weren't quite so sure. The next method that was used, the second method, was based on the water level data. Neptune looked very carefully at water levels in 3 wells at a time. So if you can imagine determining the slope of a hill from 3 points, that's all you would need to determine which direction was downhill, right? 2 points on a topographic map or on a hillside, you wouldn't know what the direction down was. But if you had a third point to triangulate, you could see which way downhill is. And that's what we do with water level information. You want to find out where the water table is going downhill, and that would be towards an extraction well. That would tell us that the system is being, that the contamination is being contained by one of these extraction wells. So there's a line on here, it's in blue, it's called Neptune equipotential, and that's a line that is based on the water level elevation data that says within this blue line, that would be to the left, if you will, of this blue line, those wells that have contamination are being contained by the full IM system. Now that's a little different than the pink line, but it's a different method. Now, I personally did it differently. I don't show this one on here, but it's just as an example of how how independent the independent review team is. We do things on our own. So I did what's called a flow net. Some people might understand what a flow net means, but it's a graphical way of relying on groundwater data to tell you what is being captured, which directions groundwater flow, and so on. Groundwater flows, and so on. A third method is based on FEHM. That is the code you know has been used at Los Alamos. It's populated with data, parameters, inputs, and that becomes a model of the system. And when that model is used to track the directions of groundwater flow, you get the result that's shown in green. It says Neptune particle tracks. That's using the computer model to tell us what direction the water table is sloping. So essentially, everything inside that line that's green, labeled Neptune particle tracks, slopes towards the extraction wells. Outside of that, it could be going somewhere else. Now, our independent review team also did their own model, and they found, for example, under a full IM operation, the outermost, the curved line to the right or east, was a capture zone that was predicted using a simple two-dimensional model. And for partial IM operations, you can see there's a red dashed line that's labeled ITR CSM particle tracks partial IM. That was sort of our own work to give a reality check to these other methods. So the bottom line, the summary is that the analysis of capture has a considerable amount of uncertainty. But we feel complete capture likely did not occur at R45 and R70. But the chromium near R61 likely was captured, even though concentrations tended to increase after some time, but we feel it still was captured. So the next slide, please, gets to a question that was put to us that's perhaps a little obsolete now. But at any rate, we were asked to evaluate alternatives for getting the remediation system back online. Recall, there's 5 extraction wells and 5 injection wells, and I think their combined rates are probably something like 280 gallons a minute, something on that of that order. And this chart shows the proposal by New Mexico Environment Department to extract from the green boxes, maybe in some combination, but inject into 2 and possibly 3, the green extraction boxes where we pump out from the interior and inject in the southern boundary at I3, I4, and possibly I5 if the completion of the well SIMR3 turns out to show no contamination there. The review team in its own, before we understood that there was even a turn-on of the system, in, what was it, September, I think you said, our work was pretty much wrapped up by then, and we had only heard late in the game that this was something that happened. And we're very happy to hear that because we realized probably, I would say as a team, we realized this probably in the early summer. It was inevitable. Everybody saw it. There's no reason to stop. Just turn something on. It can't hurt. So that was a conclusion we reached early on, and I'm glad that information sort of found its way to where it needed to go. So if it turns out now we have a contamination, let's say at R70, that's the very far to the right extension of the plume. That seems to be an area where we're not likely to be able to capture contamination if the system is turned back on, even at its full operation. So we need, likely, other extraction wells, some additional capacity. Perhaps some turning an injection well into, an extraction well into an injection well or vice versa, reconfiguring things, and new extraction wells in the vicinity of R70 and perhaps elsewhere. But at any rate, what it implies is that with using only some of the injection wells, we need to get rid of that water in some other way. We need additional capacity to get rid of the water that is being pumped out, since we see a need to pump out more water to contain the plume. We also need expanded capacity to dispose of the water that's treated. So one of the questions that was put to us is, well, what do you guys think about where that water could go? How could we get rid of this water if we can't use some of these wells for injection because they do tend to compromise contaminant migration? So we came up with some suggestions. I think they're only suggestions that we convert PM3, the well that has been shut off for 4 years. That's on the far, can you see it on it's the very easternmost well on this map. It's kind of in the northeast, that's it, that's PM3. So one idea was, because the plume seems to be heading generally in that direction, could we somehow convert that into a well that was injecting water back into the formation? Could we drill a deep well, a different well, deep into the lower part of the aquifer? Could we add other injection wells on the upstream side of the plume so that that clean water would come in and displace or push the existing plume faster towards the extraction wells? Another idea was to use what are called vadose zone injection wells. The vadose zone is what we call the region of the earth that lies between the land surface and the water table. You might say it's dry soil or soil until you get down to the water table. The jargon for us is it's the vadose zone. So you could put wells in the vadose zone, let that water percolate out of the well and find its way down to the aquifer in some locations. Hopefully that would not transfer across a contaminated soil horizon. Another suggestion was spreading basins, larger areas that could be used to allow water to infiltrate in ponds on the surface. And another suggestion was to extract the water from these additional extraction wells and pipe it over into the lower part of Sandia Canyon. Let the water flow down the stream and infiltrate and become recharged to the groundwater. But basically, we didn't really act on any one of those. There's no recommendation for a specific approach. But we felt that it would be best to have a working group look at this. It's a very complicated issue, but it is an important issue that constrains what you can do going forward. There's a lot of engineering issues, there's geologic issues, there's water rights issues, there's riparian habitat issues, and then there are issues about, well, what are the adverse potential consequences of where we put this water? What could go wrong? So we recommend a working group, a study group that gets all these parties together to kind of help evaluate and move towards the same goal together. On this matter, we also recommend going forward with drilling some of the wells that the NMED has proposed to fill these additional data gaps. And our approach, not knowing what actually was happening, we felt that if extraction could occur at EX4 and 5 and injection could occur at EX4 and 5, that would be a reasonable startup. Glad to see that they're doing what they're doing, but that was our recommendation at the time.
So what Dr. Stevens has gone through essentially is the approach, that we took to get to our recommendations. The independent review team would get presentations from the New Mexico Environment Department, from the Department of Energy, from specific contractors that were experts on a particular topic. And then they would engage in an independent verification of the salient points that affect this work the most. And finally, the NMED, the DOE, the experts were excused, and the independent review team had conversations within the team and different efforts within the team, technical efforts, like the ones that Dr. Stevens has gone through, to come to consensus as to what was going to be our finding associated with a particular recommendation. So next view graph, please. As I was telling you, we just presented question 1 and 3, topic 1 and topic 3, all dealing with the chromium plume control. Now we go to the chromium plume modeling. And by the way, the figures that we are presenting here, those numbers, 319A, table 3-2, they come directly from the report. So you can further elaborate in looking at that report and the particular figures that we are discussing here. So there were two main questions associated with this particular topic of chromium plume modeling. One of them dealt with potential data gaps in the conceptual site model, and the other one dealt with the groundwater flow and transport model that is utilized today by EMLA. So in the first instance, when we are talking about reevaluating certain aspects of the conceptual site model, Dr. Stevens is going to go through an actual figure of the conceptual site model. And the particular recommendations that were made by the independent review team deal with the role of stratigraphy and property contracts between the major hydrostratigraphic units. In addition, there was a tremendous amount of emphasis on horizontal hydraulic conductivity and vertical hydraulic conductivity values, and the importance, of those values on the modeling. We also talked about the role of supply wells in plume migration. And finally, investigation of potential beta zone sources of chromium-6 contributing to the groundwater plume, and that is being studied, and its migration. So the second major question dealt with transitioning to a groundwater flow and transport simulator. Today, EMLA uses FEM, and it is important, that I make it clear that FEM is a capable code, and even today, it remains the most capable tool for predicting capture of any interim measure well field configurations. However, not due to anything dealing with any errors or any issues associated with FEM, the independent review team did recommend that we have a transition from FEM to some of the codes that are the family codes of ModFlow. And in particular, the example that they gave was ModFlow 6. The reason for that is transparency. It has nothing to do with FEM not being capable, but the fact is that ModFlow, the ModFlow family of codes, has a wider user community, and it is easier, frankly, to do simulations with it. FEM is a sophisticated code. And we also thought that if different entities wanted to get, their own experts, it would be a lot simpler, to find experts that were cognizant of ModFlow than experts that were cognizant of FEM. Just as a side note, some of the independent review team members have utilized FEM before for other studies beyond the chromium plume, and were very aware of the great capabilities of the FEM code. So with that, I pass the floor to Dr. Stevens for the conceptual site model figure and the table associated with this decision of transitioning from FEM to mud flow.
So the next chart, please. The next chart, please. Page 9, if you have page 9.
Well, if not, everybody has the handouts, you know, so this, you can refer to the handouts.
Sure.
Figure 319A in your handout.
So this figure is what might be called a hydrogeologic conceptual site model. And it illustrates in our mind's eye how the system works. What happened in terms of the source area, the migration pathways, the materials through which the chromium has migrated, and so on. So what this chart shows, to back up and get back to Jessica's analysis, where there was a release from a cooling tower, that water flowed down through Sandia Canyon, it percolated into the alluvium underneath Sandia Canyon. That water in turn percolated down through the vadose zone in a rather circuitous pattern because of the complex geology, in particular various strata of basalt layers. And then it found its way in a variety of locations where that water drips into the regional aquifer. So in this regional aquifer, what you can see here on the left side would be more oriented towards the mountains, and on the east side you have the Rio Grande. Groundwater is shown by this dashed blue line. It says regional water table, and it has a little triangle on it. It's a dashed line. And you can see that that's overall the line slopes from the mountains down towards the river. So we often find this is common, that groundwater follows the topography. The contaminant plume is shown in orange. It's a very shallow relative to the total thickness of the water-bearing horizons underneath it. And that is shown in this center of this chart. One of the important aspects of modeling is to not only get the direction of groundwater flow properly, but to get the exact slope of that water table, because when the water table isn't sloping, you can imagine if a flat surface like this table would be the flat water table, and you put a marble on it, it's not rolling anywhere. As soon as I tilt it, it starts to roll. That's the way the contaminants move as well. And if you notice to the west of that orange plume, the water table is a little steeper. In this area where the chrome plume is, the water table is a little flatter, and it becomes a little steeper again as you go to the east. So the model should honor that. The model should also do something to honor the geology. And in this chart, you can see there are various strata below the water table. That is on the bottom of the map here, has pumice, sands and gravels, basalt, sands and gravels. And so to some extent, the geologists drill lots of holes, and there are people sitting on those drill rigs mapping in minute detail every color, every size of every grain that comes out of the ground. And they piece that all together to try to interpret what they call stratigraphy is, and that is how laterally continuous or how thick those various strata are. And so that forms the conceptual model. You have that as a modeler in your mind's eye. You want to be able to take that information and quantify it in your model, the code. You build this information into the code so it becomes a model to make some predictions. When we look at FEHM, we find that the code is just fine. We've looked in some detail at some issues in there, where those issues were resolved, but we have some concerns or recommendations about how to improve on the model. And one would be sort of looking at the system in an alternative way, looking in as an alternative site conceptual model. For example, a model which better honors the geology shown on this figure. There's also some, I'll call them nits and gnats, but when we parameterize the code, that means we put in values for these different strata. They're different. They have different permeabilities. They have different porosities. They have different thicknesses. They have different storage coefficients and so on. In some cases, they're very, very similar. Most cases, they're very, very similar, but maybe some slight differences. We feel that it's important to reassess how these parameters are input into the model and what values go into the model. There's a great deal of effort was spent in the appendices of our report dealing with just this issue. The FEHM model, we feel, needs to do a better job of describing the slope of the water table as you're seeing it right here is in sort of a sketch, to show it's steeper on the west, flatter in the center part, and steeper on the east part. One of the things that's not in the FEHM model that is important is, you see this, that's a basalt. It's a gray strata. That's particularly different than the others. The others are sands and gravels of different colors, and geologists like to, it could be a sand, but this one's red and this one's gray, and they'll call them something different. But from a hydrologic standpoint, they're very, very similar. But basalt is different. And so honoring the geology, especially in that regard, could be important to make predictions with FEHM or any model. FEHM does not have that basalt layer in it. FEHM does not have the PM wells in it. That is, these deep wells that are pumping even below the basalt. Some are above it, some are below it. Some wells are screened across it, both above and below the basalt. So that's an important feature that we feel is important to capture. And also this, the locations where the contamination is dripping down into the aquifer. There's a lot of uncertainty about that. When did that happen? How much is there? Over what area does it actually occur? There's really some uncertainty about that, and we feel it's important to try to get a better handle on that time distribution of input into the regional aquifer. So the last issue.
The table first, the comparison, the comparison of the flows.
So we can go on to the next figure on this last issue I want to talk about. As Inés mentioned, there's a family of codes out there that pretty much the vast majority of the environmental community in the groundwater business deals with their problems of a variety of, just like this, using a code or a family of codes called ModFlow. It's the code used by the U.S. Geological Survey, for example. It's tailored to just this type of problem. There's nothing really wrong with FEHM, but people in the regulatory community, most people in the practicing consulting industry don't know how to use it. So it creates a barrier, if you will. And to break down that barrier, if everyone were to use ModFlow, I think everybody would have greater trust and transparency in the predictions, because anybody on their own could run the code on their own, take the same inputs, test it yourself. So that way, all the parties could focus on using modeling for modeling for decision purposes, and that's really why we do modeling, is to make decisions. So the IRT suggests that this is a good time to perhaps take a step back to conduct maybe a lessons learned activity from where we are with the modeling to find a best value approach to go forward with in the future and maybe build a consensus for a modeling strategy.
So the next topic, regulatory matters. The recommendations of the independent review team are twofold. Number one, to implement an adaptive site management strategy. And I have to say that the independent review team felt that there should be, given this particular study that we were conducting, a bias for action. In other words, the adaptive site management, even when you don't know everything that there is to know in order to design a final remedy, that doesn't mean that you cannot do anything. That means that you should implement certain interim measures like has been done in this particular case, and depending on the results, change the next step. Actually, both the New Mexico Environment Department, the Department of Energy, and the independent review team felt that what has transpired here with the interim measure is a good example of implementing an adaptive site management strategy. Implementation of the interim measure, observations, pause, let's see how do we take those observations into account, and restart of the interim measure with in a different configuration. The other recommendation in regulatory matters was that the actual investigation as well as the ultimate remedy of this chromium plume migration would actually benefit greatly from collaboration between very close collaboration between the DOE EMLA, the New Mexico Environment Department, the Pueblo of San Ildefonso, as well as other stakeholders. The last topic is well design, and Dr. Stevens is going to go through the recommendations of the independent review team, as well as some of the figures associated with encapsulating how this decision and this recommendation were issued.
We want to move to the last slide, table 3-3 on page 12 of the handout. Okay. So before I get to that one, it's the New Mexico State Engineer's Office that issues permits for drilling monitor wells. As you know, there's been some recommendations for drilling monitor wells. You can't go forward with those until there's permits obtained. So these monitor wells, most of them, I think it's fair to say, in the chrome remediation area have been drilled in such a way that there's a casing in a hole, and the casing has a well screen in it, and then it has another well screen down below. We call those dual screened wells. One string of casing with two screens on it, the same pipe. They're threaded on to the same pipe, two well screens. Inside the well, separating the two well screens is what's called a packer. A packer is a mechanical device that allows water samples to be taken from the lower screen, passed up through the well to the surface, and another sample taken from the upper screen and also passed up to the surface, so you can measure water levels and chemistry at two horizons within the same well. This is a design the state engineer doesn't really want to approve. It's not in their manual, I believe. So they would argue that these wells, the problem is that when you drill down deep and you go through, say, a contaminated zone, and then you continue to drill down deep and you want to see how deep the contamination is, their feeling is that that process drags the contamination down so that there's contamination that's now introduced by the drilling process into a zone that hadn't heretofore been impacted. That's their primary concern. So we looked at the wells that I showed you that has maybe 20 or 30 time series charts on it, and we looked carefully at the ones that are at the shallow zone and the deeper zone, and we couldn't, as you saw, you could see that they're different. in any one location, the shallow one looks different than the deeper one. There's no evidence that we found that the wells in the IM area were compromised. They all seem to be sampling different parts of the aquifer. Now, it's important to understand one of the aspects, somewhat of a detail, about hydrogeology and different types of aquifers. We basically have two general types of aquifers. One is an unconfined aquifer. That's an aquifer which has a water table. That is, you start drilling down in your well, and all of a sudden you hit water, and there's where the water table is. Another type of aquifer is called an artesian aquifer, a confined aquifer. In that situation, you might drill down through the earth and you find a strata, and you go deeper below it, and all of a sudden the water gushes up. That would be something you'd find in more of an artesian-like condition. That's a condition where it's very appropriate to have separate, isolated wells so that you're not introducing any contamination to go deeper. But we have unconfined conditions. There is no confining layer that we've seen within the chrome remediation area per se. Deeper basalt layers, it's called the Miocene basalts, that's a different story. But where the contamination is in the upper 150 feet or so that we see so far, that's an unconfined aquifer. And the regulations, I believe, for the state engineer likely apply more to the case. They're more relevant to the case of an artesian aquifer. So the IRT would support the use of dual screen wells and encourages the Office of the State Engineer to grant a variance to their policy. We feel from our analysis and answering the questions that have been asked of us that so much valuable information was obtained from these dual screen wells, allowing us to determine, well, why is concentration in R45S2 increasing? What's happening with R61S1? Why is that going on? So having these two locations, two sampling locations at in one well has been very valuable. So what happens if we have to drill two wells, one to this depth, move over to another location and drill down another depth? We're taking valuable resources away from available good work that could be done in analysis or sampling, and it takes a lot longer to drill. These holes are over 1,000 feet deep, and it takes months, if not a year in some cases, to complete some of these wells. So it really would slow down the process to have to go put a shallow well in and then a deeper well. So that's kind of a picture inside the casing. Now there's another issue that the state engineer is concerned about, and that is, what do you do outside the casing between the earth that you drilled through and that casing string? So how do we seal that off? In other words, if you think about a hole and there's a casing in it, I have water up here and it could flow down the outside of the casing. That's a real concern. Don't want to have that happen. So what do we do in well design? You put a sealant in the annular space, allowing the screen to only communicate with the part of the formation that's right outside of it. In many of the wells in the IM area, the material used to isolate the annular space outside the casing has been a material called bentonite. It's a sticky clay. It really swells when it gets wet. And that's, in our view, we looked at the data, we looked at the results and said, well, it seems to be working. The clay seems to be effective in preventing channeling outside the casing. The state engineer argues that cement should be used. Now, Los Alamos, environmental management at Los Alamos has scientists who felt that, well, you know, this cement has material in it which could introduce chromium into the aquifer artificially. So you'd detect chromium when it really wasn't there naturally or from the contaminant source, but it was from the cement. So that is why the wells were drilled and sealed off with bentonite and not cement. So we looked at this issue. I looked at it in great detail. And so did my colleague Brian Looney. And we've come up with a compromise approach which uses coated bentonite granules. And that is particles of clay that are more rounded and have a material on the outside that doesn't allow those particles to stick. So they will settle down into the well, be placed at the proper location, and then use the cement above that so that near the well screen you use the bentonite, which doesn't have any potential to introduce artificial chromium, and then use cement in the annular space as the state engineer would like. So it seems to us as though that's a good compromise. This chart illustrates the kind of detailed thinking that went into the selection of this coated bentonite granules and what some of the pros and cons were. It's just an example of sort of the logic path that we took to be very careful about what the options are and what the advantages and disadvantages of each were before we came up with a recommendation.
Very good. This concludes our presentation. So we turn the floor back to the chair.
Thank you, Dr. Triay. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. I appreciate that presentation. It was really informal and just great information for us because it's something we've been looking into for quite some time now, and it's just quite a bit to comprehend here, but I really appreciate it, and I would want to turn over the floor to any of the members for any comments or questions. I do see Mark online with his hand up first. I'll go ahead and start off with Mark. I'm sorry, Mark, you're on mute.
Thanks for that. The question I have is the summary of what you just said for a recommendation to turn on some of the ejection wells, put together a working group to study solutions, and continue with the extraction injection in some combination?
Actually, that's a pretty good summary of what we recommended, but let me just rephrase it so that people can follow, the report. So the interim measure has been restarted as of September the 30th of 2024. The independent review team was very glad, that decision had been made by the New Mexico Environment Department and by the Department of Energy. We did recommend an adaptive site management strategy to look at the interim measures dealing all the way to the final remedy. And that is exactly how the way that you described it is permissibly what one would do in an adaptive site management strategy that different, for instance, working groups are put together, and they have the ability to move forward a little faster with a greater, degree of completing certain actions before the final actions are taken. Dan, if you want to add anything, go ahead.
I think I might just recall two in my presentation that I mentioned as far as working groups are concerned. One was related to modeling, and more or less taking call it a focus group, if you will, on how to best go forward with modeling, because there's a lot of decisions that need to be made soon. Certain aspects of the modeling could be postponed while other activities occur. So there's prioritization of a lot of tasks there that could be done. And the other one dealt with the water disposal question. There's a variety of options, maybe one or more can be implemented at the same time in order to extract more water to contain the plume better.
The final question I have is your summary in the slideshow that you presented based on the independent review of the Chromium interim measures remediation system in Mortland Canyon, Los Alamos, New Mexico, dated December 2024, or is it some other document?
Actually, yes. I mean, the independent review, exactly like you read, dated December 2024 is the, oh, my apologies. I was not on speaker. So yes, you know, what you read is the title of the independent review team report. It dated December 2024 indeed.
Thank you for that. I wanted to confirm the source material. No further questions.
Thank you, Mark. On to our next question. Joseph?
Mr. Chairman, this is for, it's not a question, but an input. My thought of going through my brain here for Estimada Jessica. You know, part of your first PowerPoint presentation, the topic, the way you presented that was definitely exceptionally outstanding. Because in the past of, you know, the reality that in many government projects that are the integral part of the nuclear industry, that institutional memory, the history, it's always, for some reason or the other, what I've seen in my experience involving the historical background, how it started in the first place is usually invisible. But in this case, the way you presented that on as a PowerPoint presentation from a layperson, I understood that. Understood it that it's the, it was clearly presented as fact with your dates from the beginning years of 1956 to 1972 to the present. It's, to me, for me, it's outstanding. For Estimada Inés and Estimado Daniel, I can tell you that the overall presentation to the CAB, from me to you, by the independent review team, clearly illustrates the subject matter expertise that we, as a CAB, should be listening to, and we appreciate that. Now the question for you guys. Where, on your last page, or the one where one of your recommendations was it would be beneficial if the New Mexico Office of the State Engineer's Office would permit dual screen monitoring wells to be constructed, where can the CAB assist in making this specific topic become part of the recommendation? I think it's very important that the State Engineer's Office understand what our role is as a CAB member, as a CAB as a whole, of how important their policies are impacting our communities out here in New Mexico, of them not, I'm not saying not, but there should be a little more better relationship going on the positive side that will come out with a positive outcome on that particular recommendation. So where do you think we should fit in this one? Or is it our role to even ask?
So the New Mexico Environment Department yesterday told us that the New Mexico Environment Department, the Office of the State Engineer, and EMLA, we're going to have joint conversations regarding the recommendations that were made in this report. So if either NMED or DOE wants to comment, I think that is something that when we heard that the New Mexico Environment Department was telling us the path forward, we thought that was extremely beneficial because that conversation needs to occur among those three parties.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Jessica, did you have something for us?
Just one thing to add to what Dr. Triay mentioned related to the New Mexico Office of State Engineer permitting dual-screened wells, we have heard that they are willing to consider the use of dual-screened wells on a case-by-case basis. We are also actively reaching out to the New Mexico Office of the State Engineer to get information from them on their position of the report findings and recommendations so that we can chart a path together. So we're, cautiously optimistic that we'll potentially get some tri-party agreement on how to move forward with regard to dual-screened wells.
Outstanding. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Joseph. On to our next question, Stephen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, would it be fair to say that the results of the technical review team have not resolved definitively the initial dispute between EMLA and NMED as to how to proceed, but have instead hopefully established a framework for determining that result?
The way that I would put it is that the independent review team clearly first looked at the proposal that the New Mexico Environment Department sent to EMLA, and they found that proposal not to be unreasonable. So that's my first observation. The second is that indeed, we recommended this adaptive site management strategy. And the reason is that that conversation between NMED and the Department of Energy and San Ildefonso Pueblo is essential as to how they're going to press forward. But the point being that we very clearly recommended the restart of the interim measure. And the New Mexico Environment Department and the Department of Energy have decided to start it since September the 30th, I believe, of 2024. And that is the main recommendation here, is that with this chromium plume, a bias for action, and making decisions that allowed you to move forward with some of the corrective actions is essential.
It further says that further analyses are required. Does the report provide any guidance as to what those further analyses are or how they're to be obtained?
He's talking about further analysis. That was the final remedy. In other words, the site data gaps. And you already touched upon some of them, but if you want to elaborate on that would be great.
Well, I think the report is very detailed in some recommendations on, let's call them data gaps, information needs. Certainly, the most important of which is the extent of contamination horizontally and vertically. That's essential. And others relate to being able to better understand the physical system and incorporate that as accurately as we can into the predictive model so that the predictions are can be relied on with greater confidence. We have recommended as well going forward with the monitor wells. I believe they were called data gap monitor wells. There was a handful of those for monitoring in the vicinity of R45S2, for example. So we agreed with that. This report is packed with recommendations, so many I can hardly remember them. But overall, you'll find dozens of recommendations, I think, in this report that are very important to bring forward and consider.
Has there been any assessment of the proposed or the anticipated costs involved?
No, we were not asked. The charge for us was not related to cost. It was pretty much just answer these questions, which didn't include cost analysis.
Does DOE have any such analysis, Jessica?
Yeah, for the major recommendations coming out of the report, We estimate the total cost to implement could be in the ballpark of around $160 million and spread out over a number of years.
Do you know how many years roughly?
It depends on a variety of activities, including prioritization of implementation of those recommendations, the potential need for any additional funding that we may need to implement recommendations so as not to disrupt our ongoing cleanup work. So it's hard to predict specifically, but I think, in a best case scenario, might be about 2 to 5 years to implement if we got full funding.
Do we have any numbers about the costs incurred thus far in dealing with the plume?
I don't have that off the top of my head. We could take that for action.
That would be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So a couple of points. The independent review team, even though we were not asked, to calculate cost or estimate, the value of the work, we do recognize, that being cost effective is an important aspect for this type of study, especially in a very complicated site. So to that point is what Dr. Stevens was referring to when he was saying one reason, to have these dual screen wells is indeed, for cost effectiveness. The second point is I don't want to lose the idea of this adaptive site management strategy, because that allows you to make decisions, implement remedies, see what is it that transpired, and then go either in the same direction to finish it or in a different direction. So, your question is completely reasonable, and implementing ways, that we can avoid cost, and in addition, get the site fully remediated from this particular issue are very important.
Mr. Chair, one last question. At any time across this process, has any thought been given to an alternative approach to the problem other than trying to interdict the spread of the plume?
I would imagine that, forgive me, I would imagine that maybe like natural attenuation, so something along those lines. So many of the recommendations of the independent review team deal with how to model what is transpiring. In order even, to engage hypothetically in natural attenuation, you actually need to understand the extent of contamination, and you need to have a powerful modeling tool, so that you can ensure that making a decision such as that one, again, hypothetically, is something that is appropriate, for the site. Dan, is there anything further that you would like to talk about?
I had one technical question relating to figure 327, if you could throw that back up. The one with a simmer well. That one, yes. Are those dotted lines contour gradients? Are those surface contour gradients?
Of the water table, yes.
So those are subterranean water table gradients?
Yeah, 1,000 feet down approximately.
Okay. Then would not the eastward shift of the plume seem to naturally follow given the contours of the water table?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair, if I may just quickly respond to Stephen's question about other alternatives that have been considered. So first and foremost, controlling the migration of the plume has been the predominant focus of this interim measure as we seek to understand the extent of contamination that Dr. Triay and Dr. Stevens spoke about in great detail. So that has been our first and foremost focus in collaboration with the New Mexico Environment Department. And that I think we talked about that fairly extensively. The one other thing that we have considered, and well, not considered, but we actually did try, and I'm going to explain this as a layperson because I am a layperson so that everybody understands it. So hexavalent chromium in a low oxygen environment will actually naturally transition to trivalent chromium, which is not toxic. So one approach that we actually tried was introducing type of material down into the aquifer that would actually reduce the concentration of oxygen to transition the hexavalent chromium to trivalent chromium. And I think what we actually discovered is that there were unintended consequences with that approach, and so it was determined it was not in the best interest to be part of our interim measure. So we focused on the actual treatment system that we've been working towards.
Can you describe those consequences?
I think as best I understand it, this material that we introduced into the aquifer is kind of like a molasses material. And I think it was determined that it was perhaps not going to dissipate as much as we would like and potentially sort of create
A dam, as it were?
if you will, yes. Yeah, so it's just not going to be as effective as we were hoping with regard to addressing that hexavalent chromium.
Are there written reports or analyses of that effort that would be available to us?
We'll get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Stephen, for those questions. Any more questions or comments from our members? I do recall, Stephen and Jessica, hearing a presentation on something like molasses being used for a bit on trying to control that spread of that contamination. It's interesting to hear the presentation and recommendations on what was going on. But I do have just a follow-up question on was it the table that we were just looking on, figure 3-27. Dr. Stevens, you did mention well R70 that we were able to contain and all the concentrations of the plume there. Am I hearing that correct?
I'm sorry, perhaps I misspoke. R70 would likely be beyond, outside of what was being captured.
Okay, I see. Thank you for that clarification. And here on the same table on our injection wells, so the recommendations here we have for the injection sites, I noticed they're down gradient of the plume. Is the reason why they're down gradient from the plume is that to prevent the spread from going down into any of the county wells? As on the east side of the boundary here, we do have a White Rock Los Alamos well. I was just curious if that was a reason why we're injecting cleaner water into that area.
As far as the two wells that I think you're referring to, they're called CRIN1 and CRIN2. And I suspect that that's exactly what they were used for, intended for, was to be on the down gradient side of the mass of chromium and push it back west towards the extraction wells.
I see. Great. Thank you for that. And also, are there any thoughts of gathering any more water rights for this, or are they pretty much all bought up? Also, is the permits being held up over at State Engineer causing any delay in the work?
I don't know if I can speak to either of those points.
Yeah, I would say I think that the discussion about potential water rights is something that we'll have to consider moving forward. I think the goal would be that we have a completely closed system where we don't have to consider alternate disposal aside from re-injecting, into the aquifer, but that is something that we are, open to entertaining if there is a need. But we absolutely would probably need to reevaluate our water rights if we were to pursue alternative disposal. And then, I'm sorry, what was the second question?
Just the second question was whether any of the permitting process through state engineer is holding up any of the work, whether it's a permit for an injection well or an extraction well.
So right now, no. The next well that is included on our prioritized list is Simmer 3, which is on the Pueblo de San Ildefonso. So we work directly with the Pueblo. We do not require a permit from the Office of the State Engineer. However, we are working a drilling work plan that aligns with the requirements of the Office of the State Engineer. And so then the next well that we have on the list is, I believe, R80. Yes, just looking at Brad to confirm my memory. But that one is sequenced following Simmer 3. So at this point in time, we have no delays that I know of.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. I believe we got another, that's all I have on my end. I believe we have another question here from Stephen.
Sorry, actually, we have two. One is a technical one I forgot to ask. On 3-27, Simmer Well 2, which is, I understand, is a monitoring well. Has that well detected any contamination as yet?
Nothing above background.
Okay, and that's drilled to a depth of 5,832 feet. Is that what it reflects?
Probably the elevation. I'm guessing if you have that number, 5,800, it would maybe be the elevation of the water table, maybe, or?
I'm sorry?
It's the water table elevation.
Yeah, the 5,800 is the elevation of the water table above sea level. Simmer 2 is drilled to 900 to 1,000 feet below land surface.
Thank you. Another question slipped out of my mind. If it comes to me, I'll ask it.
Thank you, Stephen. Any more questions or comments from any of our members online? Looks like we have one online. Sterling?
Yes, just a quick question for Jessica. Jessica, I'm sure you've thought of this, but I just wondered, what are your plans for public disclosure of what we heard today? Thanks.
Well, with regard to the rollout of the report, this is actually our third of 4 scheduled public engagements this week. We had a meeting with Los Alamos County yesterday, as well as with the Pueblo de San Ildefonso. We are having this meeting today, and then we have our environmental management cleanup forum tomorrow evening. And we collaborated on this rollout schedule extensively with the New Mexico Environment Department. The report itself is published, I believe, on both the DOE EMLA website as well as the NMED website. And then I believe all of our materials from our cleanup forums are posted online as well. So we'll have extensive materials available.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sterling. Thank you, Jessica, for that follow-up. And good to know about the forum. We'll definitely spread the word and hope it's well attended up there. Again, the questions were for members only. Stephen, did want to come back to you. Did you? Okie doke. No problem. So we're going to, with that, that concludes our presentation here from our technical review team. I want to thank you guys very much. Thank you, Triay, and Dr. Stevens. Thank you guys very much. We're going to move on to the public comment period. Before we take public comment period, I did want to remind them that the comment is for the record, but we will not be able to answer any questions. First on the list for public comment, we got Scott Koviak. Welcome, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Patricio and members of the CAB. My name is Scott Kovac. I'm with Nuclear Watch New Mexico. And with all due respect, it's been 20 years since the chromium plume has been originally discovered or out in Mordad Canyon there. So we just want to make sure that the regional aquifer and protection of the regional aquifer is a priority. And unfortunately, I have a couple of questions, but I'll just put them in the form of a statement. But I was wondering if you had found, if there's any way that the Technical Review Board knew if there's still chromium flowing into the plume. Is there still chromium flowing into the plume? And then I also was wondering, is there a recommendation, is there a priority for the recommendations? The Technical Review Board said they had many recommendations. I was just wondering if they had any prioritized, like is there one or two that are more important than the others? And I'm not in favor of the dual screens. We had many problems with those in the past. Well, multiple screens. So we just need to make sure if there's a better way besides bentonite or another material besides bentonite to use in the dual screens. We need to consider using those. Then, when have we received data from SIMR3 yet? I mean, I thought that one was drilled, but I may be mistaken. And I'm also in favor of using the mod flow. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Scott. Always nice to have you, Scott. Thank you. On to our next question. Joni Ahrens.
Good afternoon. My name is Joni Ahrens. I'm a co-founder of Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety based in Santa Fe back in the day of 1988. So I've been working on LANL issues and WIP issues for a long time. I just want to give a little history lesson that in 1994, LANL asked for a groundwater waiver to not do any monitoring of the groundwater. And the Environment Department said no. And they said, in fact, you have to do a hydrogeological work plan. And that began the process of modeling to find out where the wells needed to go. The first well was R25 over in the southwest corner of LANL, TA16 area. And the plan was to have it be a single screen well, drilled without bentonite clay. And then it shifted through the work plan process to a 5-screen well. And that well has recently been closed 25 years later. This is an ongoing problem with respect to the use of bentonite clay in these wells, because the bentonite clay is It binds up contaminants. The screens were not put in the right places. In fact, for the Sentry well, the SENTRY well for the Buckman well field on the east side of the river, 30,000 pounds of bentonite clay was used to drill that well, and most of it is in the bottom of the well, which would provide data about whether or not waste or whether or not contaminants from Area G would reach the Buckman area. So I want to renew, that's just one example of the opportunity that's available right now to refocus finding out about the chromium plume, the hexavalent chromium plume. And specifically, we need to do a comparison. Number one, I mean, everybody said today that everybody's in a big hurry. Well, over 25 years, we haven't gotten the data that we need to be able to make realistic and fundamental answers to what's going on with the groundwater. And specifically with regard to the 3,000 square mile Espanola Basin sole source drinking water aquifer. And if you've ever gone to the EPA's website, you can see the map of the Espanola sole source drinking water aquifer. And what that means is that 50% of the people who live in this area don't have access to any other source of water. So the priority is really what is really going on. And for CCNS, Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety, that is, let's do a comparison of mod flow and FEM. Number one, and in my history of working on these issues, I met with the designer, the engineer, I don't remember exactly his role, but he was the founder of the FEM model. And so I was meeting with him in Los Alamos with my hydrologist. And I asked him to email me I think we had an email then, yeah. Email me the directions for how to run the model, because I want to look at it before I come and meet with you so it's an efficient meeting. So I read the model, I read the directions for how to run the model, and I went and met with him the next morning. And I said, well, I have a couple questions before we start. And I started asking my questions, and he became so frustrated with the process that he left the meeting and he didn't come back. And he was the author of the FEM model. So that's why when you look at any references to my name with regard to the need for comparison of FEM and mod flow, that's when my name comes up in the report that Inés and her team put together. That needs to be done. That's a foundational issue that needs to be addressed first before we start talking about anything else, because FEM has been used, the finite element, I forget what all those words, anyways. We need to do a basic comparison between the data that we get from FEM and the data that we get from mod flow. And it's really a fundamental democracy issue to be able to have the data go into the mod flow because it's accessible to everybody. And FEM is not available to everybody. If you go to the FEM website, if you don't have the right passcodes, you can't get into it. If you don't have permission, you can't get into it. And that's a fundamental problem in terms of protecting not only the areas under Lannel and the Buckman and the Rio Grande, but the whole 3,000 square mile Espanola Basin sole source aquifer. And it basically goes, it starts up in Tres Piedras, it goes almost to Galisteo, and between the two mountain ranges. And there's more protections now for the Espanola Basin sole source aquifer than there have been. And in fact, in doing research for the site-wide, making comments about the site-wide environmental impact statement, there's extra protections that we need to make sure that our public comments are included about protecting the sole source aquifer. So that's my basic plea is that the CAB recommend that there be a review of FEM and mod flow, because we can't invest, in my personal opinion, and respectfully, that this area is special and beautiful and sacred, and we can't allow this contamination to continue to spread. And we need to understand the model more fully, and have consensus about what the model says. What the model we're using, it's got to be accessible to everybody. And we can no longer play this game with the Department of Energy and the National Nuclear Security Administration, because they're not going to say the truth. And in my years of doing this work, I can tell you handfuls of examples of when these agencies, these federal agencies, don't tell the truth. And it's come to the point where I have to speak up with a stronger voice about the need for protecting the water. So thank you for letting me go over. And I'm available. I have business cards if the CAB wants to talk. And I found this format to be really hard because I couldn't see the screen. I couldn't hear very well. It's a very frustrating process that we don't, as public members, we don't get to speak during or ask questions when the experts are talking. The other problem is that the report is 1,000 pages. People can't print out 1,000 pages to be able to review it, especially color copies. There's really some significant environmental justice issues with regard to access to the CAB and access to be able to make informed public comments. So thank you very much.
Joni Ahrens, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. No other members from the public? Stephen, we'll come back to Stephen. Looked like Stephen remembered his question. Go ahead, Stephen. Thank you.
I kind of wanted to go back to a 30,000-foot view and ask our assembled experts what their degree of confidence is that interim measures, adaptive management, whatever else the further analyses produce, what's their degree of confidence that 100% of the chromium plume can be interdicted? Or is there a probability that at least some portion of it will escape downstream?
Any thoughts or ideas from our technical experts?
I think to be able to show that there's been containment of the 50 microgram per liter concentration is doable. It's not doable to get every molecule. That doesn't happen at remediation sites. And so I think this could be a very successful effort. I really do. Chromium has some characteristics that are very favorable for recovery because it's conservative. it tends not to stick to things. And so once you get it out of the pore space, you have most of it. Some of it may diffuse into some of the fine textured sediments that causes perhaps some of the rebound that's been seen during shutdown. But for the most part, I think this site has the potential to capture and the contamination and remediate it, if you will, down to the 50 microgram per liter standard. It might take a while, but I think it's doable.
So then there would be no above the standard escape that you would anticipate?
I think we've seen already that R70 has concentrations above 50 micrograms per liter, and this is an interim remedy. So as Inés has been explaining, with adaptive site management, you're looking at a sort of a phased approach, if you will. You find something, so that's not quite what we thought was going to happen, so we modify things, we go forward and try to improve our understanding of the system. We might have found a pathway, say, through one of the fanglomerates that we didn't see before, so we put a well in and nail that and capture a lot of the contamination that way. So our understanding's progressive, and that's kind of the nice thing about this is adaptive site management philosophy is there's a lot of flexibility that allows you to be more efficient and cost effective in finding a solution.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Stephen, for that follow-up question. Thank you, Dr. Stevens. On to our next item here on the agenda. We are, again, running a little early today. I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic over to Keith and have an update from the DDFO.
All right, I just have a couple of dates that I need to let you guys know. Next week, February 5th, we have all three subcommittee meetings, the public outreach at 8:30 in the morning, consent order at 10, and then the risk one at 1. February 12th is our virtual combined meeting from 1 to 3, and the topic will be on the budget process. And then a reminder that March 19th is our next full CAB meeting at the OK Hotel. And just so you all know, Bridget is working on the dates for the WIP tour. So we're just going to give another run at that one. So that's all I had for today.
Did you mention that? The EMCF?
The EMCF?
Yes.
Is that tomorrow?
Tomorrow, 5 o'clock at South.
The EMCF is 5 o'clock tomorrow, if you guys want to attend that.
In person and virtual. There's more information on the DOE EMLA website if you need additional information.
And the location of that forum?
That'll be in Los Alamos at the Sala Event Center.
Great. Thank you, Jessica.
If you can call me in the morning.
I didn't have anything else. Patricia, do you
Great.
have anything else, Patricia?
I do not have anything else. Any other items from the CAB? With that said, I'll pass the mic over to Keith for our adjournment.
All right, meeting's adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.